what a privilege it is to have a special speaker tonight from the Institute for Creation Research in Dallas, Texas. Dr. Jake Hebert is with us tonight. And so I want to give everybody a warm welcome to the Mount St. Helens Creation Center. And I got a few notes here. If you want to, we don't have a guest book for everybody out here that you can sign into, but please visit our website and you can use the Wi-Fi here in the building. It's fine to do. And we'd love to get your information, get you a newsletter if you like, just stay in contact with you. That would be wonderful to do. My name is Bill Hosch. I'm the director here. This is called the Mount St. Helens Creation Center. And we call it that because to believe in a recent creation and a worldwide flood, and if you're a geologist like me, that makes you pretty weird. But I think we got all of science behind us. And for about the last 30 years, I've known that Mount St. Helens is the best open door for talking about Earth history. And I want other people to know about it because it takes an effort to think through your Earth history. That's what it takes. And a lot of Christians, they tend to be a little bit on the lazy side mentally. And it's good to get a good jog on that one. Okay, so before I introduce our speaker, I want to answer just a few questions. What do we do here? We are the only ones that lead inexpensive field adventures, day-long field trips to the mountain, east side, south side, west side. We sometimes have a caravan of 15 cars. We go out and do a field trip. We do a little hike, short hike, nothing big, and picnic lunch. We have a good time. It's really fun. You get kids, sometimes you get 40 kids hopping and skipping in the woods. There's nothing like it. They just have a good time. Anyway, so that's good. And in the winter months, we do the Creation Worldview class in here, and we explore for 20 weeks, 20 sessions, the origin of man, the origin of species, the origin of the universe, Noah's flood, fossils, dinosaurs, et cetera, et cetera. And we go through the origins in 20 weeks. And if you're teaching homeschool kids, including young kids and older kids, you got to do something fun. So we blow up things, and we have, notice the orange ropes up here. We have kids swinging across the room, right? If they can swing across the room and swing back again, we give them a banana, okay? And we do that when we're teaching about the ape men, because that gets pretty dry and boring if you're not careful, talking about Australopithecus afarensis and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, so that's kind of what we do here. And we get visitors of all stripes that come in here, and they get challenged to think through what the gospel really means and how Earth history is kind of twisted in a way that makes people think you got to take a blind leap to believe in Christ. Anyway, we don't think so, and we challenge people about that here regularly. So yes, most Christians, you don't really believe that stuff about Noah and the animals. You know what most Christians do? They tend to shrink, or their face turns purple or something like that. Or if you get the question, what about prehistoric ages? I don't read about prehistoric ages in my Bible. What do you do with that, you say? Well, we got a guest here tonight, a speaker. Dr. Jake Hebert is one who stands that you can hold to a recent creation, a worldwide flood. It doesn't take intellectual suicide. And so let me just introduce Dr. Hebert. He's earned his bachelor's degree in physics from Lamar University in 1995, master's degree in physics, 1999 from Texas A&M. A master's from Texas A&M. I know just a little bit about A&M. I don't think that's a party school. You got to...
UT Austin.
UT, yeah. I think that's... you got to have some something on the ball there. And he went on and got a PhD in physics from University of Texas, Austin, where he did. Oh, I'm sorry, Dallas. I'm sorry. Yeah, that's right. I'm sorry. I heard you say Austin. I got mixed. Yeah, and where he did cutting edge research on the connection between cosmic rays, solar activity, weather, and climate. Then he joined ICR in 2011 as research associate, changed to research scientist in 2021, and is currently researching the post-flood ice age. This is really good stuff, all right? the dating methods used to assign ages to seafloor sediments and deep ice cores, that is critical stuff too. And cosmology, among other research endeavors. Dr. Hebert has authored several books and contributed to other publications. So he's with the Institute for Creation Research in Dallas, Texas. He's here to talk to us tonight about dinosaurs and Christianity. Is that right? And it's hopefully it'll be of interest to all levels, and we'll have questions at the end. And let's give a nice, warm Southwestern Washington welcome to Dr. J. Hebert. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Thank you so much. I am delighted to be here. Oh, and by the way, I should mention one thing I'm working on now that I'm really excited about is we're finding evidence that animals before the flood were living much longer than they do today. And I think that makes perfect sense in light of the fact that people before the flood were living much longer as well. That's not the hardest thing I've ever worked on, but it's the most exciting thing I've ever worked on. So that's my latest research right there. But we'll be talking about dinosaurs this evening. Now, let's see, oops, I'm sorry. I always forget to do that. Who likes dinosaurs? Okay, now some of you didn't raise your hands. What's the matter with you? Okay, I mean, come on, who doesn't like dinosaurs? You know, you go to the museum, you see these magnificent skeletons, and you imagine what these things look like in real life. But it also raises questions, especially for Christians. Did dinosaurs evolve from other creatures? Did they live millions of years ago? Did they rule the earth like they say? Were they wiped out by a meteorite 66 million years ago, like other people claim? How do they fit into the Bible? And so what this evening, I'd like to show you how to make sense of dinosaurs. And really, it's not just dinosaurs. It's sort of a way to think biblically about any topic. We're going to be thinking about how do you develop a worldview, a biblical worldview, but we're going to be using dinosaurs as an example. So what we're going to do is we're going to believe the Bible and we're going to follow the clues. Okay, actually, it's not that hard to make sense of dinosaurs, but you have to realize that some of the stuff they're telling you on television and in the schools isn't really true. And once you realize that, it's much easier to make sense of dinosaurs. So a good place to start would be the 6 days of creation. And these are literal 24-hour days. Okay, they're not symbolic. They're not long stretches of time. And so a good question would be, well, on which day did God make the dinosaurs? Now, before we answer that question, we got to know how to identify if a reptile is a dinosaur. And basically, in a nutshell, the legs go straight down. Okay, that's how you tell. That's how you tell. Now, you've got reptiles today like alligators and crocodiles, but if you look at them, their legs go out. Okay, they kind of go out like this. And one of my coworkers, Brian Thomas, likes to imitate, how they do. They do like that. But dinosaurs don't do that. Okay, their legs go straight down. So I'm going to see how well you guys are paying attention. I'm going to quiz you. Is this a mosasaur? Is that a dinosaur? No. Okay. Now, some people call it a swimming dinosaur, but it's really technically not. Okay. It doesn't have legs that go straight down. What about the plesiosaur? No, again, yeah, that's not a dinosaur either. It doesn't have legs that go straight down. What about, say, a pteranodon? How about that? No, because the legs don't go straight down, okay? It's a flying reptile, but technically it's not a dinosaur. Now, we'll be talking about some of these other reptiles as well. We're not going to be just talking about dinosaurs. But we're going to be mainly focusing on dinosaurs in this talk. Now, the Bible tells us, okay, that God made the flying and swimming creatures on day 5, okay? So we looked at some flying and swimming creatures. They were made on day 5, but dinosaurs are land animals. So on what day did God make the land animals? Anybody know? Yeah, day 6, you're right. Okay. That's right. And so, but now, who else? So the Bible tells us, okay, God made dinosaurs on day 6. Now, that's the first obvious conclusion, but who else did God make on day 6? Yeah, he made Adam and Eve. All right. So, what that tells us from the very beginning, if we just start with the Bible and base our thinking on it, it means people and dinosaurs were on the earth at the same time. There was no age of dinosaurs where dinosaurs were ruling the earth. Okay. People and dinosaurs were on the earth together. Okay. And that's a big deal. Okay. But that follows straight from the Bible if you just take it at face value. Now, did dinosaurs evolve from other forms of life? You know, some scientists claim that everything on earth ultimately came from this single-celled organism. Well, what does the Bible say? Well, in Genesis 1:25, it says, "And God made the beast of the earth according to its kind, cattle according to its kind, and everything that creeps on the earth according to its kind." And so you have you have that that phrase "after its kind" appears 10 times in Genesis chapter 1. And in order for evolution to be true, there have to at least be some times when animals don't reproduce after their kind, because the story of evolution claims that fishes at some point begat, okay, or they had reptiles or amphibians, okay. The amphibians turned into reptiles, and then the reptiles turned into birds. So in order for evolution to be true, there have to be at least some times when creatures do not reproduce after their kind, okay. But we know we've never seen that happen. That's a big assumption they're making that isn't borne out by evidence. So the dinosaurs didn't evolve. And it's not just we creationists who are saying, the mainstream scientists agree, okay? They may not want to admit it, but if you read what they've admitted, for instance, this fellow right here, David Westheimel, he was the lead editor on this dinosaur encyclopedia. And he said, "From my reading of the fossil record of dinosaurs," and we'll be talking about fossils here some more, "no direct ancestors have been discovered for any dinosaur species. Alas, my list of dinosaurian ancestors is an empty one." So, you know, if dinosaurs evolved from other creatures, you ought to expect to find evidence for their ancestors, but we don't. When you see dinosaurs, they're just there, fully formed. Here's another paleontologist who said early on, again, I think researchers and even maybe lay people really felt that we had more ancestors in the fossil record than we actually do. We don't have a lot of ancestors. We have a lot of twigs. And that's what you would expect if God made the dinosaurs. They would just be there, fully formed, without having come from other creatures. And by the way, dinosaurs did not evolve into birds either. There's a lot of people trying to push that idea, and you will see pictures like this in museums where they're going to try to put feathers on them, and they did that because they want you to think they evolved into birds, but they didn't. All right, so God created the dinosaurs on day 6. Now remember, we're trying to think biblically about this. We're trying to learn how to make a biblical worldview. And one obvious question would be, well, what did dinosaurs eat, especially before Adam and Eve sinned? Well, in Genesis 1:25, God says, "Also to every beast of the earth, to every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps on the earth in which there is life, I've given every green herb for food." And it was so. So that means that dinosaurs originally started out as plant eaters, okay? They were vegetarians, okay? And not just the dinosaurs, but all the animals. The people were too, okay? There were no meat eaters. Even this guy here started out as a vegetarian. And you might think, well, why did he need those sharp teeth? Well, some of that may have been after the fall, but have you ever tried to get into a watermelon if you don't have a steak knife? Okay, those teeth might come in real handy if you're trying to get into a watermelon, okay? So we see that the dinosaurs were originally vegetarians, okay? And by the way, folks, let me kids, have you ever do you realize how badly that we messed up when we disobeyed God? When Adam disobeyed God, he blew it, and we blew it too. Do you realize that had they not sinned, that had we not sinned, you could have had a pet dinosaur? Oh, yeah, for real. You really could have had a pet dinosaur. Okay. So maybe there's a lesson in there somewhere. Okay. You know, when we disobey God, sometimes we miss out on good things that He has planned for us. Okay. So we're trying to make sense of dinosaurs. We're going to believe the Bible and we're going to follow the clues. Now, another question you might have is how do we even know that dinosaurs existed in the first place? Well, one way we know is because we have their fossils. Okay, we find their fossils, and these fossils are really just the remains of dead animals. They're found in rocks. Okay, some of that original material has been hardened, turned into minerals. But here's the interesting thing: dead animals don't normally turn into fossils. Okay, normally if something dies, okay, it's going to rot. It's going to get eaten by scavengers. Oh, look, there's some flies there swarming around it. Okay. You don't expect things to turn into a fossil. So in order for something to fossilize, it's got to be buried rapidly and it's got to be buried deep. Now, what does the Bible say about death? Well, the Apostle Paul said in Romans chapter 5, therefore, just as through one man sin entered the world and death through sin, and thus death spread to all men because all sinned. Okay, so the Bible tells us that death entered the world when Adam sinned. And now some Christians will try to say, well, people didn't die, but maybe animals died. Well, that doesn't really fit too well with what the Bible says, because God Himself in Genesis 1:31 said that everything He had made was very good. You know, death doesn't really, even death of animals is not good. Remember, the dinosaurs originally started out as vegetarians. You know, you would think that if there had been animal death in the world before Adam sinned, that God would make some of these to be meat eaters just to clean up the carcasses. Okay, but no, they were all vegetarians. And if you read Romans chapter 8, Paul talks about how the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of Him who subjected it in hope, because the creation itself also will be delivered from the bondage of corruption into the glorious liberty of the children of God. So when you read the Bible, the whole thing, you get the sense that death and suffering and bad things entered the world because of Adam's sin, not just for people, but for animals too. Now, we find these dinosaur fossils in what are called sedimentary rocks, and these are laid down by moving water. And even scientists who don't believe the Bible, they acknowledge that nearly all of these sedimentary rocks are formed by water. Now, they will try to tell you that some of them were deposited under very, stuff just slowly settling out of a lake or whatever. We disagree with that. We think there's good evidence that really it's all running water. I have a funny story to tell about this. When I was an undergraduate in physics, I decided I was going to write some evangelistic tracts, and one of them was going to be why I believe in the Genesis flood. And so, of course, I was clueless. I went over to the geology building, and I found a professor, and I said, what percentage of sedimentary rocks are laid down by water? And he said, well, probably about 95%. And then, being totally clueless like I was, I said, well, the reason I'm doing this is because I'm writing a little tract about why I believe in the Genesis flood. He goes, well, maybe it could have been 90%. Okay, so he lowered his estimate, but they admit that nearly all of these are from water. Okay, so is there an event in the Bible that can explain the fossils? Now, it's got to happen after Adam's sin because it involves death. Fossils are dead things, and it needs a lot of water. Can you kids think of something that might explain that in the Bible? You got it. You are absolutely right. Okay, the flood makes sense of the fossils. Okay, so when you look at these fossils, you are looking at the remains of creatures that perished in the flood. They didn't live millions of years ago. They lived when Noah was getting on the ark. So these creatures perished in the flood. And it's funny, even at secular museums, they kind of swerve into the truth here. If I remember correctly, this photograph is from the Perot Museum in Dallas, and it's like a shrine to evolution. But it talks about how, Dallas, Texas used to be underwater. We find these mosasaur skeletons east of Dallas. You find them in Kansas. Well, what are these giant marine reptiles doing so far inland? Well, it's because there was a flood. And so we're arguing that when you look at this fossil sequence, it's really a flood sequence. Now, some of the fossils, like at the very top, are from the Ice Age, but the vast, vast majority of these are from the flood. Now, okay, so God made them on day 6. They were originally vegetarian, and those dinosaur fossils are from the flood. Now, we know that God told Noah to take on the ark representatives of all the air-breathing, land-dwelling animals. Genesis 6:19 says, "And of every living thing of all flesh you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female." Now, dinosaurs, were they land animals? Okay, yeah, they were. Did they breathe air? Yeah. So that means dinosaurs were on Noah's Ark. And the ark was definitely big enough. It was absolutely humongous. Okay, there's plenty of room. Noah probably didn't have to. In fact, Noah probably would not have taken full-grown dinosaurs. He would have taken the juveniles, because the whole point of taking them on the ark is so that they reproduce and have dinosaur babies after the flood. And so this is a model of Noah's Ark we have at the Discovery Center at ICR. And right here, you've got a railroad boxcar. Now, the scale isn't perfect. It's a little bit off, but not by much. Okay, so that gives you a feel for how big Noah's Ark was. There was absolutely plenty of room on the ark for the dinosaurs and all the other animals. By the way, we only think there were probably about maybe 50 or 60 distinct dinosaur kinds. So probably Noah only had to take about 100 to 120 dinosaurs on the ark. Now, if Noah took dinosaurs on the ark, then that means the dinosaurs got off the ark after the flood. Now, I know that sounds elementary, okay, and it is, but there's a big implication for that. That means it's possible dinosaurs lived for some time after the flood. Okay, people might have encountered dinosaurs. Now, you go to the museums and they will tell you no one ever saw a living dinosaur. And kids, there are some grown-ups who get very upset when we suggest that people coexisted with dinosaurs, okay? But they did, okay? People were living with dinosaurs for some time after the flood, and there is strong evidence for that. There is strong historical and scientific evidence that dinosaurs lived recently. Dinosaurs are mentioned in the Bible. Now, they're not called dinosaurs because the word dinosaur wasn't invented until 1841, but there are animals that sound like dinosaurs in the Bible, but they're called by different names. One of these is in Job chapter 40, where God himself is speaking to Job, and he says, "Look now at the behemoth, which I made along with you. He eats grass like an ox." And I'm going to be arguing here that this is a dinosaur, a big, long-necked, long-tailed dinosaur, what we call a sauropod dinosaur. The first thing that's interesting about it is God says that he eats grass like an ox. That's interesting because evolutionists used to claim that no dinosaurs ever ate grass because supposedly grass evolved millions of years after the dinosaurs. Well, we now know that's not true. And you know how we know that, kids? We got fossilized dinosaur poop. And guess what we find in that dinosaur fossilized poop? Grass. That's right. They ate grass. And of course, they would have known that if they just believed their Bible. Now, it all goes on to say, "See now, his strength is in his hips and his power is in his stomach muscles. He moves his tail like a cedar." Now, what's a cedar? It's a tree. Okay. So it talks about its tail moving like a tree. Now, these dinosaurs, we know they could actually move when they would walk. The tail would move from left to right to help them balance. And so it really would look like a tree moving back and forth. And I don't know of any animal other than a dinosaur that would fit that description. And then the Lord goes on to say, "The sinews of his thighs are tightly knit. His bones are like beams of bronze, his ribs like bars of iron." He is the first of the ways of God. Only he who made him can bring near his sword. All right, so you've got that. You got the behemoth. The Bible also describes a sea monster called Leviathan. It's mentioned multiple times in the Bible. In fact, the entire 41st chapter of Job talks about it. It's mentioned in the Psalms. It's also mentioned in Isaiah. And a lot of creationists think that Leviathan might have been a super croc, like the Dinosuchus or the Sarcosuchus imperator. You can make a surprisingly strong argument because if you read the description in Job chapter 41, it's a pretty good fit. Now, others have suggested that maybe it was the Spinosaurus, but whatever it is, it's clearly some kind of monstrous dragon-like animal. It maybe not have even been a dinosaur per se, but it's clearly some kind of monstrous reptile that's not around today. Now, the Bible in the Old Testament, it talks about dragons. The word dragon or dragons appears about 20 times in the Old Testament, but you have to go to the old Bible translations like the King James Version, because the newer translations, they chicken out, okay? They will render it as a jackal. Okay, now we know that in some of these places, this just doesn't work, okay? Because here's an example where Jeremiah is comparing the king of Babylon to the Hebrew word tanin, is it a dragon or a jackal? And he says, Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, has devoured me. He has crushed me. He has made me an empty vessel. He has swallowed me up like a monster or a dragon. Well, does that sound like this? Or does it sound like this? I'm going with the one on the right. I think that's a better description, okay? The Bible even talks about flying serpents. There are 2 places in Isaiah where it mentions flying serpents, but again, you have to go to the older Bible translations because the newer translations chicken out. They render it as darting serpents, okay? Now, I will freely admit I don't know a lick of Hebrew, but I've looked up that word in the concordance, and sure enough, pretty much every other place it appears in the Old Testament, it has connotations of flight. And we know there were flying serpents, okay? There were flying serpents, but they didn't live millions of years ago like they tell us. Now, here's something you might not know. There's good reason to think that the fish that swallowed Jonah was actually a sea monster or sea serpent. And one of my coworkers, Brian Thomas, talks about that in a little booklet he wrote called Dinosaurs in the Bible. And this is also talked about in a book called The Authenticity of the Book of Jonah that was written by a man named Bill Cooper. And it turns out, the word fish in the Hebrew is pretty generic, but when Jesus is talking about this in Matthew, he uses a specific Greek word. And that word, it seems to refer pretty consistently to a sea monster that has a dog or a head like a dog. And what's really interesting, if you look at some of this artwork that the early Christians did depicting the story of Jonah, they will often not depict it as a fish, but rather as a sea monster. Okay, so here's one from Rome where you can see they're throwing Jonah overboard and you can see the sea monster to the right. Here's another one where it tells the story of Jonah if you go from right to left. So if you look at the far right, there's Jonah in the boat and they're throwing him overboard. And then he meets the sea monster. He gets swallowed by the sea monster. Then the sea monster spits him out. And then Jonah has erected that shelter like he does at the end of the book of Job, where God allows that vine to come up and cover him. Here's another one from Italy where you have the sea monster spitting Jonah out. So there's a good reason to think this may have actually been a sea monster. Okay, again, the Hebrew word's pretty general. It could be any kind of fish or marine creature, but the Greek word is a lot more specific. Not only that, the Bible may actually give us a clue as to how some of these dinosaurs sound, because the prophet Micah, he actually says something very interesting. He says, "Therefore I will wail and howl. I will go stripped and naked. I will make a wailing like the dragons and mourning as the owl." So it sounds like these dragons made this wailing or mourning sound. In fact, that's the word. The word for dragon has that basic idea. Now, here's something I did not know. You may not know this either, and I'm obligated to tell you this I didn't figure this out. The guy who figured this out was a guy named Derek Isaacs, who wrote a book. I think it was called Dragons or Dinosaurs. It's an older creation book, but he pointed out that when Moses and Aaron threw down the staff in Pharaoh's court and it turns into a serpent, the word for serpent there is the word that is normally translated dragon. Now, when God initially commissions Moses on Mount Sinai, and he tells Moses to throw the staff down, yeah, it's the normal word for serpent. But when he does it in Pharaoh's court, it's the word for dragon. So does that mean that Cecil B. DeMille got this scene wrong? Okay, could it be that when Aaron threw down that staff, it became a small dinosaur? Maybe. It sounds like it. These dragons are also mentioned by all these other ancient historians all over the place. Famous people claim to have encountered them, like Marco Polo, Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great claimed that when he was in India, there was this big dragon in a cave that terrified his men. There's a lot of American Indian tribes that talk about it. And when you kids get older, they're probably going to make you read a poem called Beowulf in high school. And when you read that, you need to be thinking about dragons, okay, and dinosaurs, because a lot of people think that the creatures there, well, they are dragons. They're definitely dragons. Some of them might actually be giant marine reptiles, or possibly some of them might even be dinosaurs, okay? In other words, this may not be just a mythical story. There may actually be something to this. The historians Josephus and Herodotus, by the way, the one thing that's really cool about Josephus and Herodotus is they both claim that the ibis bird was a natural predator of some of these flying serpents. And Josephus claims that when he was in Pharaoh's army, before he had to flee Egypt, that he went and they took a bunch of ibises in baskets and they used them to frighten off these serpents that were harassing his men. And so it's interesting. You got two ancient historians claiming that these flying serpents were enemies. The ibis would fight them. And so you got these dragon stories from all over the world. Bill Cooper wrote a book. Now it's online. You can read the whole thing for free, called After the Flood. And it gives you the early history of Europe after the flood. He actually traces some of the ancestries of some of the European peoples all the way back to Noah through his son Japheth. But the really cool part is he's got 3 chapters on dinosaurs, okay, from Europe. He's got all these cool dragon stories, and so it's really interesting. So there's all this historical evidence that these were real. They were real creatures. They live real recently. Sometimes the stories are exaggerated, but a lot of them sound like just sober history. Now, people also drew pictures of them. Now, there's been some recent criticism, okay, of some of these examples that creationists have used, and I think some of that criticism may be justified. Like, here's one example that I'll admit I have used, but people have suggested this is not a good example. Because if you can see those 2 long-necked creatures right there, right? They sort of look like sauropod dinosaurs. But on the other hand, others have said, well, they kind of look like cats, because if you look at the ears, they look like cats. The heads look like cats. The tails look like cats. This could be like a stylized representation of cats. Okay. The only thing that's different is the neck. So I'll admit, okay, that may not be a good example. There's another example. This is very recent, but and this has not been published yet. But most of us are familiar with this petroglyph of the sauropod dinosaur. I believe it's Kachina Bridges Natural Monument, I think. It looks like this was a mistake, okay? There was a guy named Nate Loper who gave a talk at the Creation Research Society meeting last year, and he makes a really strong argument. This is actually a map, and it was convincing. I have to admit, it was convincing. Now, so sometimes when we get more information, sometimes some of these arguments don't pan out. But if you want examples of some of the strongest evidence. Okay, I recommend this book, Untold Secrets of Planet Earth, Dire Dragons by Vance Nelson. He has got really high standards for what he includes in his book. I'm going to show you some that I think are pretty good that he doesn't think they're good enough. So, and he is probably the world's leading expert on this. He has looked at, I think, my coworker Brian Thomas told me, he's looked at more than, I want to say, 500,000 examples of possible dinosaur artwork. Okay, but he only includes the best of the best. So now, I'll admit, he does have that sauropod picture in there, but in his defense, this was recent research. It only came out last year. Vance Nelson, he went and he when he says that when you go there, it leaps out at you. Okay. It's easy to see how somebody could think that was a sauropod dinosaur. In my opinion, that's the only one in this book that's questionable. Okay. But he's got all these examples of dragon artwork from France. A lot of these castles in France have these depictions. Here's one from Spain, which is St. George and the Dragon. And interestingly enough, the dragon there looks a lot like something called a Nothosaurus. Okay, the mouth especially. Okay, it's got those big teeth. And here's another very good example. Vance Nelson thinks this is a legitimate example. There's a cathedral in the UK where there's a bishop who's buried there, and around his tomb there's sort of this little brass. I guess you could call it a fillet. And there's animals on it. And a lot of these are regular animals that we know about, but they look like, these two here look like dinosaurs. I mean, they really do. They got the big muscular bodies, the forelegs that are going down, the tails. And there's even one particular dinosaur called the Shunosaurus that we know had a tail like that. So again, if you want the absolute best of the best examples, this is the book to get. Now, Vance Nelson does not include the famous Stegosaurus one, even though he thinks the person who was drawing it meant to depict a stegosaur. Okay, he just thinks maybe the evolutionists could quibble with it. I still think it's a pretty good example. Here's another one that he would probably not include, but I think it's a good one. This artifact is actually in the Louvre in Paris, the museum, and you can see it looks like you got these two sauropod dinosaurs. Big muscular bodies, long necks, long tail, legs going down. And, maybe you could quibble with it, but I think that's a pretty good example. So there's a lot of artwork from around there. Yes, some of them may be doubtful, but there is so much artwork that you really can't reasonably disagree with. But there's also scientific evidence that dinosaurs lived recently. There's a particular variety of the carbon atom called carbon-14, and it spontaneously turns back into nitrogen. And so people think that you can use that as sort of a clock to estimate how old something is, because living things have carbon in them. And evolutionists normally don't bother to look for radiocarbon in dinosaur bones, because for things that are that old, there really shouldn't be any measurable carbon-14 or radiocarbon. But when people bother to look, guess what? We find radiocarbon in these dinosaur bones, okay? And that should not be able to last even 100,000 years, and that's being generous. So that's strong evidence that these things are very recent. But there's one other example as well, scientifically. They are finding soft tissue in dinosaur bones. And when I say soft tissue, I mean things like blood vessels, what look like red blood cells, skin, things like that. And so I want to go ahead and show you a little clip here from the television show 60 Minutes, where Leslie Stahl is interviewing this lady scientist. Her name is Mary Schweitzer, who made this discovery. And so I'm going to go ahead and show you this little clip right here. Oh, and I just realized I said we didn't need audio. I'm sorry. I messed that up. I'd completely forgotten about this clip. But anyway, you'll notice here, you can actually stretch. You'll watch this in a little bit. You're going to see them actually stretch
nothing left.
The fibers.
There was.
Okay.
And it was elastic.
Yeah, it's elastic. Okay, that's the thing that's so remarkable.
She showed us.
This is
video
supposed
she
to be
took
like
under the
68
microscope.
million years
That's
old.
really
How
what
on
happened.
earth
That's the dinosaur.
can that still be
without
flexible
mineral
like
now.
that? Okay,
That's what was
that's
left.
really
It's
amazing. Now, there's a funny story about that. In the interview, Leslie Stahl is interviewing Jack Horner, who was he was the advisor for Mary Schweitzer when she was working on her PhD, and Leslie Stahl goes, she's talking to Jack Horner, and she goes, "How can this be?" And Jack Horner kind of goes, yeah, how can this be? And he sort of looks away like he's a little uncomfortable. And I think he was a little worried that some of us creationists were going to grab this video clip and run around showing it to people to show that dinosaurs lived recently. Well, he was right about that. Okay, we are going around showing that to people. So you may wonder, well, what happened to the dinosaurs? We don't see them around anymore, but it looks like they probably went extinct. Some people are holding out hope that maybe in some parts of the world there might still be a few out there. But after the flood, there was an ice age. Now, as long as you weren't in the really cold part, the ice age probably wasn't too bad. There was a lot of rain, which was probably good for the dinosaurs. There was a lot of vegetation. So that was probably okay. But after the ice age, things got rough, and you had lots of deserts. You had lots of areas that were too cold. There would not be enough vegetation for some of these big dinosaurs. And also, in a lot of cases, we killed them because we were scared of them. But it doesn't look like it happened all at once. There's good reason to think some of these dinosaurs survived until the Middle Ages and maybe even later. I mean, wouldn't it be something if there really were some dinosaurs still out there? Maybe it's not too late, guys. Maybe when the Lord Jesus comes back, maybe you will ultimately get to have a pet dinosaur. I sure hope so. But the Lord Jesus deserves the glory for making these creatures, not evolution, not nature. He deserves the glory for making them. He's the creator and he deserves the credit. So I hope you found this to be interesting. If you aren't signed up for our month or bi-monthly magazine, Acts and Facts, it's our gift to you. It's free for you, but it's paid for by our donors. And we have all these articles that answer tough questions about creation and evolution. And we have these little sign-up cards that you can sign up for it if you like. You can also go to our website, icr.org, and click on, there's a menu at the top and publications. You can click on that and you can sign up online as well. And we've got a lot of free ICR material if you'd like to get some, help yourself. And there's also material from I believe the Design Science Association of Portland, and also maybe I think for the Mount St. Helens Creation Museum here as well. All right, well that's my talk, and if you kids have some questions, I'll be happy to answer them, and if you adults have some questions, I'll try to answer those too.